The world as I knew it no longer exists. The sky hasn't been blue in over a decade. It's a constant, burning hue, redder than the evening sun used to be, streaked with ash and smoke from fires that never fully die. Clouds are thick with dust, settling like a grim blanket over what remains. The air smells of scorched earth, rotting wood, and the faint tang of chemicals from abandoned factories. Every breath reminds you that survival is temporary, a fragile illusion that the planet has no obligation to honor. Once vibrant cities are now skeletons of steel and concrete. Skyscrapers lean at impossible angles, hollowed out by fire, neglect, and wind. Streets are cracked, sunbaked, or submerged under stagnant pools of water that never flow. The Missouri River, which used to swell with life and commerce, is now a scar of dried mud, its banks littered with rusted debris and bones, both human and animal. Highways lead nowhere, swallowed by sand or toppled structures, leaving only the memory of civilization etched into the earth. Even the familiar suburban neighborhoods are unrecognizable, homes with walls peeled away by storms, yards overrun with weeds taller than a person, playgrounds twisted and broken. Nature itself has rebelled. Forests that once provided shelter now burn endlessly in invisible cycles of fire, leaving blackened skeletons behind. The few remaining trees groan under the weight of heat and drought, their leaves brittle, their roots exposed. Rivers, lakes, and reservoirs are nothing more than cracked basins, exposing the skeletons of fish long dead. Rain comes rarely, and when it does, it is acidic, leaving a burn on exposed skin and corroding what little infrastructure still stands. Summers last months longer than they used to, summers that sear the land with relentless sun, and winters bring a cold so sharp it cracks bones and metal alike. Society has fragmented entirely. Governments no longer operate. The institutions that once guaranteed security and basic services have crumbled into dust and bureaucracy. Police, emergency services, and social structures are memories, spoken of like legends. Survivor groups have arisen from necessity, small, guarded communities fortified with whatever they could salvage. Some live quietly, rationing water and food with near-religious discipline. Others have turned predatory, raiding, looting, and murdering without hesitation. Roads are controlled by those who wield force, and trust is a dangerous currency. I've learned never to assume kindness is anything more than a bargaining chip. Institutions that once seemed untouchable, hospitals, schools, power plants, are abandoned husks. Their walls crumble, their machinery rusts, and the knowledge once stored inside decays along with them. Libraries remain as silent witnesses, their pages yellowed and brittle, the words inside a relic of a world that can no longer read or care. Factories once bustling with the hum of production now stand silent, their chains rusted and tools scattered, forgotten by the very hands that built them. Even technology has become ephemeral. Radios sputter and die, generators fail, and solar panels crack in the relentless sun. Electricity is a memory, a luxury that will never return. Survivors move through this world cautiously, like ghosts among ruins. Scavengers stalk highways, searching for anything usable. A can of food, a bottle of water, a circuit board that still functions. Rogue factions compete violently over patches of arable land, wells that still yield drinkable water, and shelter that can withstand a storm. Communities form and dissolve quickly, often destroyed by disease, theft, or betrayal. Human life has become a negotiation with chance. Each day is a precarious balance between hunger, thirst, and the ever-present dangers of a world that has turned hostile. Amid the devastation, small reminders of life persist. A single patch of green in an abandoned courtyard, a bird calling in the distance, or the faint trickle of water from a hidden spring can inspire hope, but only briefly. The anxiety of uncertainty hangs over everything. Every step outside carries risk. A building could collapse, a storm could descend without warning, a hostile group could emerge from the shadows. Every day survived is a victory, yet the air of nervous anticipation never fades. This is the world I walk through, and it has taught me one unforgiving lesson. There is no return to the old normal. There is only survival, adaptation, and the faintest glimmer of hope in a landscape defined by ruin. The cities are monuments to our failures, the forests a testament to nature's wrath, and the people who remain are fragile, determined, and constantly watching. The sky burns above, the earth cracks beneath, and somewhere beyond the ruins, life waits to test us again. I keep the radio fed because voices are the only things that still feel like home. Not the machines, the voices. The rough, static-laced sound of someone breathing at the other end of a ruined world. The way names get said into the dark like prayers. My generator hums in the corner like a sleeping animal. I tend to it the way I used to tend gardens, with wary hands and a stubborn hope that it will wake up again tomorrow. My name is Ray. Once, before the sky learned how to burn and the rivers learned how to dry up, I worked in a small municipal office that managed parks and trails. I did maps and permits and paperwork nobody cared about anymore. After that, for a little while, I was a volunteer at the ranger station, patching up hikers who'd underestimated the sun. That job ended the night the sirens failed and half the county left in a panic. Somewhere along the way, I learned how to make a radio speak in the chaos, and speaking kept me alive. Now I am a voice on a frequency people scan when they sleep, or when they're hiding and want to be reminded there are other humans still awake. I am also, improbably, an investigator. The two roles feed each other. My broadcasts gather stories, and the stories point me to people who need help, or to people who have vanished. The missing park ranger I'm looking for, Elias Cortez, was the kind of person who kept a first aid kit in his truck and a thermos of coffee in the dead of winter. He was also the last person who told me there was a place in the National Preserve where water still ran. People go missing here like station wagons go missing in old photographs. One day they're there, a laugh, a fistful of dried berries offered to a stranger, and the next day the trail just stops. Sometimes the land swallows them. Sometimes other people do. Investigating Elias isn't noble, it's selfish. He was someone who still answered when I called out to the air. He's a link to a world that made sense once. Finding him is about restoring a piece of myself. Surviving is a set of small, daily rituals. You learn them or you don't last. My morning begins with the generator. Oil level, spark plug, the cracked belt I've learned to trust. The generator powers a small bank of batteries, and when the sun is generous, a battered solar array I scavenged from a collapsed school gym. I run the transmitter on low power. Low power keeps the range small, enough for local voices to find me, but not enough to throw my location like a flare. People who want to be found find me by habit. People who want to find others sometimes trade goods for the hours they need on my antenna. Water is a religion, and its rituals are unforgiving. There are no wells on city maps that still promise drinkable water. The ones that do are guarded by men with more guns than patience. So I collect. Rain barrels under rusted gutters when clouds threaten. Condensation traps at night when the temperature drops. A series of layered filters, cloth, sand, charcoal, that catch the worst of the particulate. I boil what I can. For anything questionable, I use chlorine tablets salvaged from a hospital pharmacy and a charcoal filter I made from burned maple chunks in a coffee can. It's not pretty, it's pragmatic. When you drink water that's been earned through toil, you taste salvation and debt in the same gulp. Food is negotiation. I trade what I can, information, roots, the occasional soldered radio part, for cans of stew or a sack of grain. I forage where others won't risk the sun. The shadowed undercroft of a library, the cool belly of a collapsed gas station, the roots of a sagging overpass. I set snares for rabbits and smaller game, skin them, and dry the meat in the solar oven I cobbled together with broken glass and rusted sheet metal. There's an economy to hunger. Some people hoard, some people barter, others reclaim whole stores and hang signs that read community while charging coin for every can. I learned to read those signs. Shelter is improvisational architecture. My place is a half-collapsed visitor center stacked with sandbags and broken panes. The roof leaks in one corner, which is how I know rain is coming before my weather scanner squeaks. There's a curtained room that used to be the interpretive hall. Inside, I've stacked salvaged insulation, the flattened remains of mattresses, and a series of metal shelves crammed with paper charts, batteries, and the thick, stubborn notebook where I keep names and coordinates. The building creaks in storms like an old ship, and sometimes I lie awake listening to it and imagine the sea has come for me. People have asked me how I can keep going when the horizon is full of ruin. The answer is simple and messy. Because I have to. Because hope is not that big glowing thing people write about. It is a tin cup of coffee shared at dawn. It is the man who came into town with stitched hands after a snake bite because someone on the net told him where to find an old antibiotic. It is the static broken voice that says, "I hear you across the wires." My reason is stitched from obligation and loneliness, and the stubborn belief that there should be an answer when someone disappears. Those stitches fray sometimes. I smoke when I'm anxious, and my hands tremble when the memories come. Loss is a room that opens and never closes. I lost my sister in the heat wave that took half the county. Her name was Mara. She went out to fetch water and never came back. I still have her boots in a box under my bed. I take them out sometimes and press my forehead to the worn leather. I lost a team of people who trusted me once, volunteers who came to help repair the solar arrays and never left because a gang took the road north. There's a list, of course. Names, dates, the small ways they are absent now. Each loss is a lesson in what danger looks like when it is patient. Part of my method is the radio itself. I learned frequencies the way other people learn prayers. There are channels that trade news, channels for barter, channels for quiet confession. I keep a nightly schedule. At dusk, a half-hour check-in. At midnight, a lost and found segment. Before dawn, a low-voiced weather update. I've become a cataloger of human need. People send me crumbs of information. Truck with deep-tread tires heading east. 2 men taking water near mile marker 23. A woman singing old hymns by the reservoir. These fragments are like tinder. I follow them until they burn out or I find the flame. Investigating Elias is a map of small choices. Following footpaths where other people walk in the dark. Checking an abandoned ranger cabin for signs of fire. Asking a group of kids if they saw a man with a green hat. Some days it's reconnaissance, finding footprints and a tin can with initials, and other days it's trade. I offer a night on the radio to a woman who claims she saw Elia's head toward the preserve, and she gives me a sketch on a napkin of where the spring once ran. Mostly it's the slow gathering of rumor, because in this world rumor is the closest thing we have to evidence. You collect it and cross-reference, and sometimes, just sometimes, the rumor becomes a path. I am not heroic. I am practical, and sometimes I am cowardly, and sometimes I am brave. I have had to choose between saving a stranger and keeping the supplies that could keep my own lungs working another winter. Those choices leave scars that are not visible. I wake sometimes and replay decisions like a tape recorder with the volume turned up. But then a voice finds me on the line and says, "Ray, it's Marlon. The North Ridge lit up last night." And something in my chest unclenches. It's small, it's not everything, but it is proof I am not talking to myself. If there is a skill that keeps me alive beyond water and food, it is listening. People tell you the truth when you let them speak into the dark. They reveal what they fear. They reveal what they will protect. They reveal where the bodies are buried and where the wells still hold. My notebook grows heavy with names. My map has more pins than it used to, and each pin is a promise I have to keep until I can't. So I keep the radio warm and I keep walking. I wind the crank on the emergency transmitter. I patch the hole in my coat with fishing line. I barter a soldered diode for a loaf of dry bread. I write Elias' name on the edge of a page and turn it over like a talisman. The world wants to make us small, to shrink our futures down to the size of a ration pack. I refuse to let it have everything. I will search for Elias because he might be found. I will broadcast so the found will have somewhere to come. I will hold a small light where there was once a lighthouse. That is my work. That is what I do to survive. The crisis feels less like a single event and more like a long, slow unraveling. 100 small betrayals by a world that used to be predictable. It began with the rain that stopped keeping pace with the heat. At first it was a season late, then a season missed, then an entire year. Now it has been 3 years of dry skies over the county, and every morning I wake to a horizon that looks like a photograph exposed too long. Colors bled, edges frayed, contrast gone. The ground has learned to crack. Rivers that used to cut the land into livable pieces are scars of clay and salt. The air carries dust more often than it carries scent. What we call the crisis is not only drought. It is drought plus heat, plus wildfire, plus storms that come so violent they wash away the thin topsoil that had the audacity to hang on. It is the chemistry of collapse. Soil that used to sponge water now repels it. Vegetation that once shaded the ground is gone, so the sun bakes the surface and reflects heat back into the air. The local climate begins to prefer extremes. The feedback loops are cruel. Less plant life means less evapotranspiration, the natural cycle where plants return moisture to the air. So clouds form less often and the rain that should come doesn't. When it does, it is whipped into a fury and scours the landscape instead of seeping in. The forests that remain are tinder. A single lightning strike, a stray ember, a careless flame starts a fire that climbs across acres like a living thing. The smoke changes the sky into a furnace. The smoke changes the weather. The heat becomes something you can feel like a bruise. On the ground, the consequences are straightforward and brutal. Wells run low or taste of iron and chemicals. Reservoirs are cracked by bitumen with the skeletons of fish exposed. Crops fail, not just the fields, but the backyard gardens that were once the last defense of a hungry household. Food prices, for those who still swap coins, have become a cruel arithmetic of what's worth bartering. Batteries, antibiotics, a good set of boots. Fuel is precious. A generator run for an hour might mean lights for a night, but also empty fuel cans for a week. People who have never known scarcity learn quickly what it does to a town. It sharpens edges, it turns neighbors into competitors, it makes every handshake a calculation. That is why survival gets harder each day. The resources themselves are dwindling: water, soil, fuel, seed stockpiles. But the human systems that used to allocate, manage, and distribute those resources have also collapsed. Supply chains are broken. Trucks that once moved food from farm to market now sit abandoned in clotted traffic or have been taken outright. The institutions we relied on to maintain infrastructure, the municipal crews, the water treatment plants, the emergency response teams, are skeletons. When the pumps stop, engineers leave and poisons that used to be contained in industrial sites leak into the groundwater. Disease follows in quiet waves. Contaminated water, weakened immune systems, people living in cramped, poorly ventilated quarters because the weather forces them together. Then there are the people themselves. Factions, small fortified communities, the lonely roving bands that live by taking. Some groups are organized around the old logic of governance, trying to recreate cooperatives for mutual defense, sharing, and agriculture. Others operate on a more vicious logic. Take first, ask questions never. Trust is scarce, trade is scarcer. The economic currency has shifted toward things that last and are portable. Fuel, medical supplies, information that will put you where water can be found. The world has become a chessboard where pawns are traded for canned food, and kings are men with weapons and grudges. I run into all kinds when I leave the visitor center to follow a rumor or check a cabin. Marlon, a lanky man who once ran an auto shop, is the closest thing I have to an ally. He fashions radios and generators with the stubborn art of someone who refuses to accept a dead world. He taught me how to splice wire without causing sparks that would ruin the day's power. And when I found a torn map on the roadside, he helped me mark it in careful ink. He has a kindness that is frayed but not yet snapped. He will share water if you patch his roof. He will keep watch if you keep the radio on at night. We trade in practicalities and small confidences. When I ask him to come north with me to check the preserve, he doesn't laugh. He simply makes a list and packs a coil of rope. Then there are the others. A gang that calls itself the Ridge Watchers sits on the high ground near mile marker 12 and charges tolls for the ruined road. They are not all young. A brace of older men command respect because of their willingness to shoot first and ask questions later. I bartered a night of airtime for the names of their scouts. The exchange was efficient and tense. They are the ones who take advantage of travelers who are desperate, and they control the last functioning pump for 5 miles. Trading with them is a lesson in how to keep your hands visible and your eyes on the horizon. Children, too, populate this landscape. They become scouts for adults, quick and surprisingly ruthless. Because in a world where food is a present-tense demand, mercy can be a luxury. I met a ragged band of kids who had fashioned a game out of looting, a cruel mimicry of the adults. One of them, a girl of 12 who called herself June, sold me a can of peaches for a length of antenna wire. She wanted the wire to make a trap. She wanted a trap because she wanted independence. She is both a reminder of what's lost and a small, dangerous hope. Severe weather haunts everything. Dust storms arrive like rolling blackouts, and you learn to hear them first in the animals, an uneasy silence, then the distant tremor of wind. They shape the day. If the sky looks thin and hard, you stay put. If a thunderhead builds in the afternoon, you make sure your roof is secure because what comes after, heavy, slamming rain, will tear off shingles and collapse poorly fixed walls. We have learned to respect the microclimates. The ridge that catches morning fog is a tiny sanctuary for a few mossy plants and the occasional trickle. The microclimate can be the difference between a ruined garden and one that feeds a family. Seasons are no longer predictable. We live by observation and rumor rather than government forecasts. What limits my choices and those of everyone I know are the basics: water, food, fuel, and time. Time is a resource because every day you spend evading danger is a day you're not replanting or repairing. Perform a repair in the wrong moment, when the wind shifts, when raiders are nearby, and you lose both supplies and safety. Water, always water. Sometimes it tastes metallic, sometimes like wet cardboard, sometimes it is so clearly poisoned you can smell the chemical tang. When you find a source, you must test it. A cloth to strain out sediment, charcoal and sand for filtration, boiling when possible. Boiling is reliable, bring to a rolling boil for at least 1 minute to kill most pathogens. At higher altitude, give it 3. Chlorine tablets will do in a pinch, but they are finite and their shelf life is limited by heat. Distillation is an answer if you can afford the fuel and the time. Capture steam, condense it, and you will have water that tastes like victory. But distillation consumes both fuel and patience. Food is the arithmetic of scarcity. If you are lucky, you scavenge a pantry with cans that are still sealed. If you are skilled, you can find roots or traps, dry meat, and conserve grain. Seed stock is incredibly valuable. Without diverse, viable seeds, you cannot rebuild agriculture. If you trade away seed for immediate sustenance, you mortgage the future. So we hoard seeds like lit candles, sharing them with those who promise stewardship. Fuel is another ledger. A liter of diesel can move a generator for a few hours. It can also start a truck that takes you to another town with supplies. Fuel choices are moral choices. Science explains much of this. The basic mechanics are accessible. Extended drought reduces soil moisture. Soil that stays dry becomes hydrophobic in places, refusing to soak water quickly when rain does arrive, which leads to increased runoff and erosion. Heat waves stress vegetation, increasing their vulnerability to pests and fire. Wildfires release aerosols into the atmosphere that change cloud formation patterns and can reduce rainfall locally, a feedback loop that worsens drought. Infrastructure built for a different climate, storm drains. Culverts, levees fails under conditions they were not designed for, so floods and fires reach into places they never used to. You can read these changes in the land if you know how to look. Tree rings narrowed for years, creek beds filled with fine dust instead of pebbles, seasonal birds gone or appearing off schedule. It is the new grammar of the place. Actionable survival in this new grammar requires both practical and adaptive strategies. First, reduce exposure. Avoid the direct sun during the hottest hours. Plan movement in pre-dawn and dusk. Use breath-ventilated insulation, the old tents and modern tarps, to create shade. Second, secure water. Always carry a multi-stage filter kit. Cloth for gross debris, sand for larger particles, charcoal for taste and odors, and a ceramic or mechanical filter for smaller pathogens. Follow with boiling or chemical treatment. Third, ration fuel and power. Run radios in short, scheduled windows. Keep transmit power low unless you need long-range contact. Fourth, fortify shelter. Sandbags and staggered walls reduce wind and shrapnel damage in storms. Elevated beds and waterproof storage protect supplies from sudden floods. Fifth, maintain social networks. The communities that share knowledge survive better than those that hoard it. And finally, document everything. Maps get updated, names are written, wells are logged. It's the only way to build a resource commonwealth out of rubble. But even with all the best practice, the world changes faster than skills can be shared. Diseases adapt to crowded environs. New scavenger tactics evolve. Old alliances curdle when food runs short. There is an urgency to act, but there is also a peril in moving too quickly. You make a plan and something, whether a gang, a failed generator, forces you to improvise. That improvisation is where most of us live now. For Elias Cortez, the missing ranger whose name I whisper into the radio to keep it real, the crisis is a personal map of these larger failures. He was the last person who told me, without flourish, that there was a trickle of water still running in a gorge 2 ridges east. If he was right, then there is hope for more than one person. If he is gone, then the trickle might be guarded, or poisoned, or the rumor of it might be an act designed to lure people into a trap. My investigation into Elias is, therefore, not just about finding a man. It is about testing whether the fragile threads that still connect people to place, knowledge of a spring, the skill to fix a pump, the memory of a migration path for game, can be recovered, or whether they have been permanently severed. Every morning I wake to that question. I check the batteries, tune the radio, and listen for a voice that will change my map. The crisis tightens like a noose and pushes us into choices we never wanted to make. But we adapt, we learn. We teach one another how to boil water without burning it, how to listen for the subtle change in a wind that means a storm will arrive, how to read a footprint by the way the weight falls. We are improvisers in a world that demands better tools. The planet has grown harsher, but we are still human, and that stubbornness, that refusal to be wholly erased, is its own kind of science. It is the slow experiment of survival. They came on a night when the moon was nothing but a pale, tired coin in the sky, the kind of night that makes everything sharper. Shadows bite harder. Every sound becomes a promise of trouble. We had been living off the salvage of the past week. A half case of dented beans traded for a spool of antenna wire, 2 liters of water siphoned from a gutted RV tank, and a small can of diesel Marlon had filched from a pump guarded by a distracted watchman. The generator coughed and the batteries hummed with a tired, brittle charge. I'd let the transmitter breathe a little longer than usual because someone had called in a voice I couldn't forget, a woman saying. Elias sat at the ridge with a green hat. He said he'd find water. It was thin, nearly gone in static, but it was a pulse we followed. The first sound was the scrape like metal against bone from the east side of the visitor center, someone testing the perimeter. Marlon was already awake. He sleeps with a wrench under his pillow and the coil of rope at his feet. June had been curled up in a blanket by the door, a watchful child who makes more sense than most adults. I thumbed the radio off and the world shrank to the sound of our breaths. Raiders are not poetic, they are efficient. They do not scout for sympathy. They test fences, look for weak walls and weak wills. The Ridge Watchers had been making rounds, and for a while their presence had meant tension but not violence. Lately, though, the lines have blurred. They'd started taking a toll on the road more often, and people began to say the Ridge Watchers' leaders drank something that had the effect of steel on their tongues. They had eyes everywhere. We didn't know how many until the door crashed inward and voices filled the hall. "Light," one of them barked. A flashlight stuttered across the room, and in that harvested pool of brightness, I saw faces pale and hungry like the ground outside. My chest tightened. I had a choice then: radio on and risk a homing signal, or radio off and risk losing the lifeline that keeps others coming. I killed the transmitter, and for one strangled second I felt the world close in like a fist. Confrontation is a negotiation shoved into a barrel of hot iron. I kept my hands where they could be seen and spoke in the low, level voice I reserve for trying to convince people I am less valuable than whatever they steal. "We've got a sick child," I said, and Marlon stepped forward with the charade of bandages, a practiced hand on the man's arm. It worked enough for them to search. They took cans and the one luxury item we'd been saving, a jar of coffee, and left with a warning hissed on the way out. They left June shaking. After they left, the room smelled more like the world than it had in months. It smelled of other people, of sweat and boot leather, of the unapologetic business of survival. We counted what remained. We restrapped the batteries. We patched the broken pane that had let the flashlight beam in. And we did the thing we always do in the hush after pillage: inventory the grief and push on. June refused to be pitied. She took the length of antenna wire and set her jaw like a woman 10 years older. "I'll make the trap better," she said. "They'll think twice next time." It should have been a small, contained event, a theft, a scare, and yet it shifted the geometry of everything. That night the radio was quiet. The voices that usually picked at the edges of sleep were thin and scattered. The map in my head rearranged itself. Where there had been the comfortable illusion of territory, there was now a corridor watched by men with guns. The rumor of Elias and his green hat, which had been a hopeful spark, was suddenly weighted by new danger. If Elias had been headed for the preserve because there was water, someone had noticed. Whoever noticed might be guarding it. Survival here is the arithmetic of risk. You weigh what you have against what you might gain, and then, if you're honest, what you might lose. We had been rationing water down to a cup a day for the plants in our tiny greenhouse, a tattered idea of cultivation wedged beneath broken skylights. The plants were stubborn and small, but their very green was like a sinuous memory of abundance. If the ridge held water and the Ridge Watchers controlled the road, then any expedition across that margin would be a wager. I could stay and keep the radio lit, keep a signal on for the lost and the lonely, and rely on the trickle of rumor to find Elias. Or I could go, because some pieces of hope are more dangerous to leave alone than to chase. So I began to prepare. Preparation is less about grand plans and more about the little redundancies that keep a life from collapsing. Spare belts for the generator, a well-folded tarp, a small pack of seeds tucked in a boot, an extra canteen hidden behind a stack of brochures in the interpretive hall. Marlon volunteered reluctantly. "If you go and you don't come back," he said, voice tight, "I will keep the frequency running." Marlon's hands always find a way to make something from nothing. He had fixed the radio transmitter with chewing gum and a fragment of a coaxial cable once, after a storm chewed through the antenna. "You're not leaving me the map?" he asked. He wanted the map because maps are hope put into coordinates. It was not only the raiders. The land keeps tightening like a muscle too. The heat wave that followed that theft made the days longer and the nights thinner. The wind changed direction and began to carry a different mineral tang, a saltiness on top of dust. The wells that given us only brackish water became a new puzzle. Pump it too much and the taste turned metallic. Pump too little and you risked losing the head pressure. We rationed by cup and then by drops. June learned to measure by eye and to move quickly when the sun stopped forgiving. And there were other voices on the frequency. They were small and careful at first. Collective has a place south. Blue house, vault on the old research road. Rumor mutated like an organism when it had to survive. The original seed would change, adopt new features to be remembered. The collective, people said, was a group that had managed to web together engineers, farmers, and one technician who knew how to coax old desalination and fog capture machines back to life. Some said the collective had a greenhouse, a reliable well, a school where children could learn how to read again, and where antibiotics were not whispered about like holy relics, but administered like medicine. For a while, the collective was a myth used to lure people out of hiding, a mirage on the radio. For others, it was a promise of civilization resurrected. I had heard these names before. People attach hope to acronyms because acronyms are portable. But the collective was different. The signal we picked up from an elderly man on a channel in the afternoon had the texture of truth. He spoke with details, coordinates that matched a derelict research road, mention of a fog catcher array that had been experimental before the collapse, and a cautious, human aside. He had traded his last can of peaches for the map that led there. "If you find it," he said into the static, "tell them Ray sent you. Tell them we need hands." The man's voice ended with a coughing fit. We traded a length of wire for the rest of his story, and he left with a strength I envied, the kind of certainty that comes with giving away everything. That certainty is a dangerous thing. Belief can blind you to the terrain of real risk. It can make people cross a watched road or enter a field that used to be mine, but is now a no man's land because of a cracked reservoir that leaks toxins. It can make people easy marks for those who would take advantage of faith. I am learning to test hope the way I test water, strain it, boil it, and then, if I dare, sip it. The collective sounded like something worthy of testing. The question of trust has been carved into me like a tattoo. Trust too much, and you leave open the doors of your place for others to pass through at night. Trust too little, and you hoard so fiercely that you kill the very network that keeps people human. The community that had formed around our ruined visitor center was fragile but functional because we had a rhythm, radio at dusk, inventory at dawn, watch shifts through the night. Marlon trusted me because I kept the logs straight. June trusted me because I gave her things that made her feel powerful. A length of wire, a rusty pair of pliers, the right to stitch her name on the map. But when the possibility of the collective came up, people watched me like a hinge. If I left, what would they have? If I stayed, who would bring back the thing we needed? These are the internal axioms of the new world. You are guilty until proven useful, and you are useful until you are dead. The memory of Mara, my sister, is a ghost that whispers in arguments and decisions. She had gone for water and never returned. I still replay the moment I let her go with a pack lighter than hers. The thought that I might send others into the same dark grates at the edges of my conscience. I am tethered to guilt, and to a stubborn duty to not send people into traps I might have seen and ignored. So we made a plan that was as pragmatic as it was risky. Marlon would stay and keep the radio warm. June would come with me because she knew paths, and because her small, fast feet could be the difference between a successful foray and a corpse on the road. We would move at dawn, skirt the Ridgewatcher's main road by using old utility tracks that peaked like scars through the scrub. And we would carry only as much as a man, and a girl could reasonably carry without slowing to a crawl. We would test the water ourselves in stages, cloth strain, charcoal filter, a brief boil. We would travel light in case we needed to run. We would leave the transmitter on low power in case someone needed us, but not so loud that it became a beacon. Packing felt ceremonial. I sealed the small pack with care, like a woman folding a child's blanket into a box that might be sent away. I tucked Elia's name into the inside fold of my map, a note that read, Green Hat Ridge last seen. The map was not much, a torn county road, a creek, a ridge line marked by old survey pins. It was, however, a map that contained a story, and stories are the closest thing we have to directions. We left before the sun claimed the day. The horizon was a thin smear of copper. The wind tasted faintly metallic, and it made me think of the rusted cans on the Ridgewatcher's shelves. Every step away from the center felt like an incision. We were taking a piece of each other with us. The responsibility of those who remain and the duty to those who are lost. The world tightened around our lungs, but we kept moving. Rising action is not an event. It is the accumulation of small compromises that change the shape of a life. Each rationed cup, each stolen can, each frightened child, each rumor, each raid, they are all weights. They bend the limb of the present toward a decision. For me, that decision was to follow the rumor, to test the fog catcher's promise, and to chase the last person who could tell me where the water truly ran. The danger is real and the stakes are specific. Find water and you feed a few families. Fail and you send a girl like June home without a brother, without a father, without even a story to explain why. So we walk forward with pockets full of careful hope and hands full of tools. Each mile is a question, and each question must be answered. The radio is a thin thread tied behind us, and I hope it holds. The world is escalating, not in a single terrifying moment, but in a steady, grinding crescendo. The winds are angrier, the raids more frequent, and the rumors louder. Elia's green hat is a tiny coordinate in an expanding map of threats and possibilities. Somewhere ahead is either salvation or a clever trap. We will find out which it is soon enough. The ridge smelled like old wire and burned grass when we crested it. That thin, metallic tang that means a place has been touched too often by flame. The world fell away on either side. To the west, a bowl of scrub and the pale ribbon of the ruined highway. To the east, the gorge where Elia's had last been seen, a throat carved into the land with a whisper of water at its bottom. The map I carried was a joke, a torn page with a hand-drawn line and a coffee stain. It was also our only promise. We moved quiet because silence is a kind of armor. June scouted ahead in the low brush like someone made to slip between roots, and I followed with the pack that held our filters, a small can of diesel and a coil of rope. The sky was a bruised copper. The wind had a restive energy that made the hair stand on my arms. I remember thinking, stupidly, that the weather felt like a held breath, and then the breath broke. Elia's was not where I expected him. The ridge opened onto a small flat where an old service road had once dipped into the gorge. Someone had hammered a makeshift shelter against the canyon wall, tarps and corrugated sheets held by rusting rods. It looked like someone had decided to be stubborn and call that place home. A green hat lay on a rock beside a dented thermos and a scattered handful of cigarette butts. I thought for a second that the hat was all I would find. Then I saw the tracks. Boot prints wove away toward a narrow cut in the rock, and there, half hidden under a collapsed sign for a research outpost, there was a body. He was smaller than the picture I'd built in my head from the radio, and dirt and blood had made a bronze mask of his face. When I spoke his name, it came out like a question. Elia's. His eyes opened. They were the same green as the hat, quick and frightened. He tried to smile, and the smile cracked. "Ray," he rasped. "You how?" I knelt like a prayer. He smelled of oil and the gorge. Wet rock, the faint iron tang of old water. His right leg was trapped beneath a fallen beam. There was a splintered rail pinning him to the mud. He had a shallow cut across his torso and a fever madness to his voice when he tried to explain. "The fog catchers," he said in fits. "It worked for a while. We had a morning thin, but then someone came. Ridgewatchers. They wanted the pump, said it was theirs if they took it." His words slid in the mud with pain. I tried to stop them. They hit the support. I fell. I heard them laughing after. I thought they left. He coughed and spat something dark. The gorge was not empty. Behind the shelter, A slender pipe side with the last of a trickle, and I could hear the faint, promising tick of condensation in a metal trough somewhere down the incline. The fog catcher, an old mesh array most people thought was experimental nonsense, had collected the nightly mist and fed a small condensate line into the pipe. It was a fragile thing, but it was working, or had been until men with guns decided to make a business of survival. I should have tuned the radio and called Marlon. I should have set a beacon, asked for help. But the radio was the one thing I could not risk. It would be a homing signal for the Ridgewatchers if they were still close. Instead, I breathed into Elia's face and listened to the sound his chest made. I checked the trapping beam, a splintered telephone pole, and cursed because it was the wrong weight and the wrong angle, and I did not have a jack. I had an idea, though. Makeshift leverage, a fulcrum from a rock and a looped rope around the beam. It would be slow. It would be painful. We worked in silence, 2 hands and a girl's quick feet rooted in the present. June handed me tools as if she had been born with them in her palms. Elias shivered and muttered names that made no sense. At one point he asked after Mara, and a hot weight pressed into my chest like a fist. I remembered the day I let my sister go for water. I remembered the rusted boot I kept under my mattress, the whisper of a name like an accusation. Every time someone was pinned, every time a body was in need, that memory turned decisions into knives. The rope strained. The beam shifted in a terrible millimeter that felt like mercy. Elias screamed when the angle moved, the sound raw and animal. I had to grip my hands to the rope until the skin burned. When the beam finally rolled free, the leg slid out in a slow, resigned sigh. Elias vomited and then went still, the way someone does when they are tired of being brave. We needed to move fast. The fog catcher was not a secret for long. The Ridgewatchers had already been there once. Their tolls, their raids, they would not let a working water source go without claiming it. The wind had shifted. In the distance I could see dust rising like a low hiss. The sky darkened on the west horizon before any storm we had seen before. It did not feel like ordinary weather. It felt like the land deciding to close its mouth. Elias could not walk. He had a fever and the leg had to be splinted. The only option was to drag him, and dragging would slow us. Worse, dragging would make noise on the scrub and leave a trail someone could follow. We could try to move him up the utility track, cross the hidden road, and drop him at the visitor center, but it would take hours. I had to choose. Risk everything to get Elias back to safety, or stay and try to secure the fog catcher to save many at a smaller scale. This is where the story of who I used to be felt most like a cage. In the old days, I would have called for help. I would have convened committees and I would have signed forms. Now decisions come down to the breath you have left and the weight you can carry. I looked at Elias, the man who had kept a first aid kit in his truck, who had once told me a story about a creek that sang in spring, and I looked at the sheen on the metal trough where the fog catcher spilled a fine stream of water. The choice was not between heroism and cowardice. It was between 2 necessities: the life of one man I loved into the edges of my map, and the life of many who might one day crawl toward this gorge because a voice on the radio had said, "There is water here." I made a decision that felt like both at once. We would not leave Elias here to die while the Ridgewatchers came and took the pump. We also would not try to carry him across the open road in full daylight. We would rig the fog catcher to bleed a small, concealed line of water, enough to keep the immediate shrub gardens near our visitor center alive. And then we would move Elias under the shield of a storm. It was madness, of course. It was also the only plan that let us protect something beyond our own skin. We worked quickly. I set Marlon's taut knot from memory in my head, an old rigger's hitch I'd learned watching a YouTube video before the world learned how to collapse. We fashioned a siphon, braided plastic tubing into a hidden reservoir, and camouflaged it beneath rocks. The fog catcher offered only a few liters a day, but hidden and rationed, it could buy time. The sky ripped open as we finished. A wall of dust rolled over the ridge like a moving mountain, and in its wake came the taste of something metallic. I felt it on my tongue, and the fear in my chest doubled. Dust storms here were more than a nuisance. They could kill by filling lungs with sharp sand, by carrying chemical residue from a factory spill. We were exposed on that ridge. That was when the ridge watchers arrived. They came in a cloud of noise, boots, and a flashlight strobe cutting the dusk. A shout, a crack. Someone took a shot that pinged off the corrugated tin like a mocking note. The leader, a man with a scar that made his mouth look like someone had tried to erase his smile, barked orders. They had been clever enough to encircle us from the road down below. It was a trap or the aftereffect of one. Either way, it closed like a hand. We were 3, me, June, Elias. The ridge watchers were a dozen. I could feel the equation in my bones. If we tried to fight, we would die. If we surrendered, they would take the pump and perhaps Elias, and we would come back with nothing. The air had a metallic tang now that made the world seem sharpened. I thought of Mara's boots in the box. I thought of the nights I kept the radio alive so a voice could find another voice. I thought of the green hat beside Elias' thermos. The leader grinned and said, "Water for the taking. Hands where we can see 'em." "Take it," I said. "Take it all. Only," my voice was quieter than I wanted, "only leave him. He's sick. He'll die if you take him." The scar man's eyes flicked to Elias and lingered on the hidden line of tubing I'd camouflaged. His smile tightened. "We don't leave anything useful," he said. "Useful is how you stay alive." June's hand found mine. She squeezed. It was her small palm, steady as a promise. I thought quick of trade, of trick. I slipped a wrapped bundle from my pack and rolled it toward the leader. A coil of old radio wire, vintage enough to charm a mechanic, and a small flask of diesel. "That's all I got," I said. "It's worth more than that pump if you want to keep a generator running." He hesitated. "A contract. The ridge watchers were always merchants first. They wanted profit for brutality." While he considered, a gust hit the gorge and the fog catcher sang. A thin, bright hiss as collected moisture found the line and threaded into the hidden reservoir. A sound like a bell tolled only for those who knew how to listen. The leader's head turned. He stepped forward to feel the pulse of water at the edge of his boots. For a moment his eyes softened with the recognition of scarcity, a flicker of the trader beneath the thug. That moment was enough. I bolted. It wasn't heroism. It was simple movement. A lunge, the crack of my boots in the scrub, the smell of dust in my nose. June and I dragged Elias as best we could, the rope biting into our palms, the ridge watchers shouting, and the storm closing like a lid. We fell and rose and moved again. Bullets pinged. One grazed Elias' shoulder with a hot kiss of pain. I think someone laughed behind us. We reached the utility track and then the sheltering dip where the ridge bowed and the road rutted into the land. We staggered like ghosts, and when we looked back, the ridge watchers were huddled around the pump, the leader's hands already on the controls. He had traded a little for a lot. A flask of diesel, a coil of wire, baubles in a world where resource becoming power is everything. The fog catcher's hidden reservoir remained. It would not be enough to end a famine, but it would be enough to buy days. That was what I had wanted. Days to teach others how to rig catchers. Days to get Marlon and the collective's whisperers to find us. Days to make a map that was not a torn page with coffee stains, but a trimmed spine of knowledge. Elias coughed as we stumbled downhill, and at my shoulder his fingers found mine for a brief human grip. "You're a stubborn woman," he said through the dust and the pain. "Don't let them take the story." I did not answer. I let the decision sink in like a stone. I had chosen the fracture of one life to protect the slender continuity of many. I had chosen to risk everything for a waterline hidden like a secret. The ridge watchers had taken something, pride and pump, and a little more daylight for their bellies. And we had taken something too. Elias, pulled out with the stubbornness of those who can no longer afford to be merciful in silence. We made it back to the visitor center with the storm pressing us like a memory. The radio hummed faint through the door, Marlon's voice, ragged with worry, asking if the line was clear, if the fog catcher had been real. I hissed into the static, "It's real. We have water. We have Elias." My words were sharp with relief and grief. The storm beat against the roof like a drum. That night, Elias fevered and spoke of places I would go on to find on my map. He whispered coordinates and I wrote them down, one by one, like rosary beads. He told us what he had learned about the fog catchers and the way to coax more from them. Mesh with a certain weave, placement on a ridge that catches nocturnal fog, a drain line that avoids sunlight and theft. He told us things that were both science and salvation. When he slept, we listened to his breath and counted it like prayers. But everything we had done had created movement on the map. The Ridgewatchers now knew this gorge had water. They knew it because they had stood at the pump and felt the pulse. They would come again. Others would come on the scent of rumor. The world had changed. A trickle in a pipe was now a story, and a story is fuel. That night I thought of Mara's boots and the shame that had been my compass. I thought of the girl who slept with a coil of wire for a toy and a promise. And I thought of the Scarman's smile that had needed only a coil of wire to trade brutality for a little convenience. The choice I had made was not pure. It left me raw with the knowledge that to save small things, you sometimes have to lose others. The cliff edge of survival had a way of making choices into confessions. At dawn, the storm left the world polished with dust and a brittle sort of quiet. The fog catcher's hidden reservoir had given us a few liters overnight, enough to wet tongues and irrigate a few seedlings. Elias' fever broke by the third day. He could not walk for a while, but he lived. And in the margin of survival, in the stolen days the fog catcher bought us, we began to teach. Marlon crafted better camouflage for the tubing. June learned to read the night fog for where it would settle. We updated the map. The climax was not a single hero moment. It was a throat-tightening series of choices, missteps, and small triumphs. We had traded, fought, lied, and bled. We had found water and we had made enemies. We had saved a man and we had let others take something too. The turning point was not the discovery alone, nor the rescue alone, but the reckoning of who I had become in the act of choosing. A woman who would risk a life to protect the fragile architecture of hope. Later, when I would sketch the map with more precise ink and send the coordinates in coded bursts on the radio, I would remember how close we had come to losing everything. I would remember the Ridgewatcher's boots in the dust and Elias' hand finding mine. In that memory, hope and guilt braided together. That is the nature of the turning point in this world. It does not separate the good from the bad. It forces both into a single, messy truth. The world did not forgive us for our small victories, but it did allow them to exist. After the storm, after Elias was back at the visitor center and the fog catcher had begun its hidden work, we breathed a thin sort of relief, one measured in cups of water and careful glances over our shoulders. The Ridgewatchers had left the gorge for now, but their shadow lingered like a stain on the land. They would return, or others would. That was the new law of the earth. The scarcity of resources made enemies of strangers and sometimes friends of those closest to you. Elias, weak but alive, had been given a second chance that he did not ask for but that we insisted upon. June moved among us with a quiet vigilance, counting every step, listening for every crack in the building, the wind, the groan of old metal. She had grown in ways I could only admire and fear. The child who had once held a coil of wire like a talisman was now a sentinel, learning the rhythm of the land, the language of survival. We worked together to stabilize the fog catcher and maximize its output without making it obvious to anyone passing the gorge. The hidden reservoir provided a few liters each day, enough to hydrate seedlings and provide a minimal supply for our own bodies. It was a trickle, not a torrent, but it was hope measured in measurable units. Every drop mattered. I measured it carefully, jotting notes in my weathered journal as if documenting this fragile lifeline might somehow make it stronger. The aftermath was not glamorous. There were no parades, no grand acknowledgments, only the quiet, painstaking process of making life slightly less impossible. I scavenged, repaired, and rationed. Marlon worked tirelessly, reinforcing our defenses and keeping the radio alive, the constant hum of the generator a lullaby to our tenuous survival. Each evening I sent coded signals over the frequency, a pulse of information to anyone listening. Water, shelter, and perhaps a map of safety, if they were clever enough to find it. Yet the environment itself offered no easy comfort. The scrub and thorn bushes slowly reclaimed patches of the burned gorge, but the overall landscape remained cracked and unyielding. Dust still filled the valleys, and the wind carried a metallic tang, a reminder of the chemical residue left behind by human industry. The heat pressed against our skin in waves, each one a silent warning of how fragile our existence truly was. And the sky, ever the bruised copper of perpetual dusk, refused to show the blue we remembered from childhood. Nature was healing in small, stubborn increments, but the scars of human neglect ran deep and persistent. I reflected often on the choices we had made. Saving Elias had been a gamble, and hiding the fog catcher a quiet act of defiance. I thought of Mara, my sister, whose memory had haunted me since her disappearance. Her absence was a permanent ache, a reminder that survival came at a cost. But I also thought of June, resilient and watchful, and Elias, breathing life back into a fractured world. My understanding of hope had shifted. It was no longer a promise of tomorrow, but a measure of what we could protect today. The radio became more than a tool. It became a conduit of responsibility. Every message we sent was a thread tying us to others who still clung to existence. We were part of a network, fragile and scattered, yet vital. I realized that survival was not just about water, shelter, or protection. It was about connection, about maintaining a pulse of humanity through static and distance. Encounters with other survivors remained tense. Some came in fear, others in desperation. I learned to read intentions in the tilt of a head, the clench of a fist, the hesitation in a voice. Trust was rationed more carefully than water, and betrayal could be lethal. Yet even amidst that wariness, small alliances formed. Survivors shared tips, guarded secret caches, and occasionally offered companionship. These fleeting bonds became lifelines, reminders that the world had not entirely abandoned us. The Ridgewatcher's threat lingered like an unseen predator. We reinforced the center, camouflaged supply caches, and set rudimentary alarms using scraps and wire. Every day was a negotiation with the environment, with other survivors, and with ourselves. Each choice carried consequences, each movement had weight. Yet in this delicate balancing act, we discovered resilience in ways that statistics or maps could never measure. Elias began to recover slowly, teaching me about the fog catcher's mechanisms and the ways we might expand its reach. Each lesson felt like a small victory against the entropy that surrounded us. He spoke of other potential water sources, hidden or abandoned, and possibilities for barter and trade. In him, I saw the embodiment of human ingenuity, a stubborn refusal to accept the world as entirely lost. Night after night, I sat with June at the edge of the ridge, staring into the gorge, listening to the faint trickle of water from the concealed reservoir. The wind whispered secrets, and the stars, when they were visible through the dust, reminded us of a world that once was and might be again. In these quiet moments, I felt the weight of all we had endured and the fragile pride of what we had preserved. Hope, I realized, was not a destination. It was the act of continuing, the refusal to surrender to the dust and decay. It was in every step we took to protect the fog catcher, every ration carefully measured, every coded message sent into the ether. It was in our choices to protect life, however small, in a world that constantly demanded we choose between survival and morality. By the end of the first week after the storm, the immediate crisis had passed, but the world remained dangerous. The Ridgewatchers would return, other survivors would seek what we had, and the environment would continue to test us. Yet in the midst of this uncertainty, we found rhythm, a fragile equilibrium where water flowed, the radio sang, and human determination held firm. The fog catcher, Elias, June, and the battered visitor center became symbols of that balance. They were reminders that even in the harshest conditions, life persists in stubborn, incremental ways. Our victory was quiet, measured in liters and footsteps, not fanfare. But it was real, and it was enough. I thought often of Mara and of the lives we had lost, but I also thought of the ones we had saved. Reflection became a tool, a mirror to examine choices, a compass to guide us through the uncertainty. Each night when the dust settled and the stars broke through the copper sky, I allowed myself a small acknowledgement. We were still alive, and with that survival came the responsibility and the privilege of hope. The aftermath of our ordeal did not bring certainty, but it brought perspective. We were small actors on a scarred stage, yet we were actors nonetheless. The world remained harsh, but each small victory, each life saved, each hidden liter of water, each message sent into the static, reminded us that humanity had not been entirely extinguished. In the quiet hours, I often whispered into the radio, "We are here, we survive, and we will find a way." It was not a boast nor a prayer. It was a statement of fact, and in that statement lay the essence of all that mattered. That even in collapse, even in despair, there remains a thread connecting us to possibility, to resilience, to hope. The ridge, the gorge, the hidden fog catcher, they became symbols of what we could protect against the relentless advance of decay. And as I lay down to rest each night, I allowed myself to believe, if only for a moment, that tomorrow might bring another trickle of water, another voice on the radio, and another step toward a fragile, reclaimed world. We survived. That was our story. And in survival, there is the seed of something larger, a chance to build, to nurture, and to continue, no matter how small the spark. The storm had passed, but the world remained unyielding. And yet, within its unyielding grasp, we found space for hope. Would you like me to continue to section 10 now, delivering the bittersweet conclusion? The days after the storm settled into a rhythm, uneven but persistent. Water still flowed from the hidden reservoir of the fog catcher, enough to sustain us, enough to remind us that survival was never guaranteed but always possible. Elias grew stronger each day, his leg healing in splints and careful care, his voice regaining some of the stories it had lost in fevered whispers. June remained vigilant, scanning the horizon and teaching me to see the world through the subtle language of survival, the tilt of a branch, the ripple of dust, the pattern of shadows in the scrub. Hope had returned in fragments, fragile and quiet. It was measured not in grand victories, but in the minutiae of everyday life. A cup of water after a sleepless night, the faint hum of the generator holding against the persistent wind, a rationed meal shared in silence with someone who understood the cost of scarcity. The fog catcher had become more than a tool. It was a symbol, proof that ingenuity and care could coax life from even the most unyielding terrain. Each drop of water it produced felt like a tiny rebellion against the decay surrounding us. Yet the threat remained. The Ridgewatchers were a shadow always in the back of my mind. They would return, driven by greed and the instinct to control scarce resources. Others, too, would come, drawn by rumor or desperation, their intentions unpredictable. Every day we moved through the world like dancers on a cracked stage, balancing between caution and action, aware that one misstep could undo everything. But I had learned something essential. Survival was not a solitary act. It was connection, the careful weaving together of trust, knowledge, and compassion. Elia's recovery, June's alertness, Marlon's maintenance of the radio, these were threads in a fragile network, each one keeping us tethered to life and purpose. The radio became our voice, our invisible lifeline, sending coded messages to anyone listening, offering guidance, warning, or reassurance. Even if no one ever answered, the act of speaking into the static reminded us that humanity persisted somewhere beyond the horizon. I found myself reflecting more and more on the nature of hope. It was not a promise of safety or comfort. It was the insistence on moving forward despite uncertainty, the courage to protect what we could, and the willingness to teach others the skills to endure. Hope was the fog catcher's slow drip, the steady hum of the generator, the faint glow of a lantern in a ruined world. It was small, but small was enough. The gorge, once a site of near tragedy, had become a place of quiet vigilance. The hidden reservoir fed a small patch of greenery, and I tended it like a sacred act. Each seed that sprouted felt like a minor miracle, a reminder that life could persist even in soil that seemed dead. The environment was still harsh, the skies still copper and unyielding, but there were pockets of resilience, patches of stubborn beauty that demanded acknowledgement. I realized that our lives had become a delicate balance between caution and action. Every day presented choices with consequences: to move or stay, to fight or flee, to trust or doubt. The storm had taught me that the world would not pause for our grief or celebration. It would continue, indifferent, and we had to find a way to persist within it. The ridge watchers, the wind, the dust, the heat, all were reminders that our victories were temporary, our safety fragile. Yet even so, each small success, each life we preserved, became a testament to human resilience. The weight of loss remained ever present. Mara, my sister, was gone. Friends and acquaintances I had counted on were now memories etched in dust and shadow. Every life lost was a reminder that survival demanded sacrifice. But every life saved, every lesson passed along, every drop of water preserved, was a proof of the value in continuing, even when despair threatened to overwhelm. In those quiet moments, I would sit by the edge of the gorge, Elias resting nearby, June perched on a rock like a sentinel, and I would let the wind carry my thoughts. I thought of all we had endured and all we had yet to face. The world would continue to test us, and we would continue to respond, step by careful step. There was no finality here, no guarantee of safety, only the ongoing rhythm of survival and adaptation. And yet, amidst the uncertainty, I found clarity. Life was a mosaic of fragile victories and relentless challenges, and it was in these pieces, no matter how small, that we found meaning. The fog catcher, our hidden reservoir, our quiet victories, they were proof that even when the world seemed lost, the human spirit could carve out spaces of hope. I spoke into the radio one evening, letting my voice carry over the static. To anyone listening, I said, we are here, we survive. We fight for tomorrow even if tomorrow is uncertain. Protect what you can, teach what you know, and trust sparingly but wisely. There is still water, still life, still hope. Stay alive, stay human. I paused, letting the words linger in the ether, knowing that somewhere, someone might hear them. And if no one did, at least we had acknowledged the existence of possibility, the stubborn insistence that life could endure. The world might continue to crumble in places, and storms would rage, and threats would never fully disappear. But in the shelter of the visitor center, with Elias recovering, June vigilant, and the fog catcher's drip steady, I allowed myself a quiet truth. We had survived today. That was enough to face tomorrow. That was enough to remind us that the spark of hope, however fragile, still existed. Survival, I realized, was never about certainty. It was about presence, awareness, and persistence. It was about cherishing the moments that life permitted, small though they might be. Every drop of water, every whispered story, every cautious step across the gorge was a testament to resilience. It was proof that humanity could endure, not in grandeur but in perseverance. And so, with the storm past and the gorge quiet once more, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of loss and the promise of continuity. I would tend the fog catcher, guide the seedlings, keep Elias safe, and teach June all I knew. I would broadcast into the void, offering guidance, hope, and a reminder that the smallest acts of survival ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. The future remained uncertain, but the present was ours to shape. We were alive. We were vigilant. And as long as breath filled our lungs and water flowed through hidden pipes, there was a chance, however slim, for life to continue, for hope to persist, and for the human spirit to endure. So to anyone listening, anyone surviving in their own fractured corner of this world, continue. Protect what you can, teach what you know, and never underestimate the power of a single drop of water, a single act of care, or a single spark of hope. The world may be broken, but so are we, and we endure. We endure, and in that endurance lies the possibility of something more. The story is not finished. Survival continues, one day at a time, and hope, no matter how small, is the thread that binds us to tomorrow.